Welcome to NCBA's Cattlemen's Call podcast with host Lane Nordland.
All righty, everybody. Thank you for joining us once again on the Cattlemen's Call podcast. I'm Lane Nordland. Happy to be with you as always. I had to run into the house and actually take a shower for this next conversation because I've been stacking square bales all morning before it reaches 106 degrees here in Montana. But something's cooking on today's podcast, we could say, along with the heat outside. I am so excited to be joined today by someone that so many people see on social media, whether that be Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or even Netflix recently. Our friend Kent Rollins is joining us here today, the Chuckwagon cowboy there out of the state of Oklahoma. And Kent, as you join us here today, what is the weather like down your way?
Oh, we always say if you have green grass here by the 4th of July, it's the Lord's blessing, and we sort of made that. We were fortunate enough to get a little rain here, there, and yonder, but it's been over 105 for about the last 12 days, no southwest wind blowing, so it cures things out pretty quick. You know, it's got a little yellow tint to it, but most of the cattle down here, really, we didn't get any good runoff water, so the tanks are all dry, and what people got windmills, they're still a pumping, but the old water table down here, they deplete it nearly every year if they get a chance watering that cotton.
Pretty strange weather for everybody here in Montana. We got a bunch of moisture the last month, but it was too late. It was cold all spring. Our grasses didn't get enough heat to grow well, and I don't even think I got a ton an acre to cut on the dry land hay. But we're in the livestock business, and we learn how to roll with the punches each and every day. But, as I mentioned, I think so many of our audience members are familiar with you, and just your energy, your passion, and everything you do, and just sharing the end product that so many of us enjoy raising, being beef and other foods. But as a cook and a camp cook and sharing your story, what has life been like since social media has been an opportunity to share the Western way of life and almost a forgotten way of life in terms of being a cook out on the range?
When I started guiding elk hunters back in the early 80s, I didn't know a thing about social media, internet, or anything, and didn't want to know at the time, but I remember when I first met Shan, had went to Elko, Nevada to the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering up there. I was doing a workshop and entertaining, and she asked me one time, she said, "Do you have a website?" And I said, "No, ma'am." She said, "You have a computer?" And I said, "No, ma'am." She said, "You have an email address?" I said, "Route 1, Box 318. And she said, "No, that's not it either." She said, "How do you advertise?" I said, "Word of mouth and a full stomach." Back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was cooking a lot, there's, the ranching and the cowboy circle it may cover a lot of country, but it really, in a way, it's a small circle because word gets out, hey, this guy can cook pretty good. He used to be a cowboy, but now he's a cook. He stood on both sides of the fire. So it really just went from one ranch to the next because every ranch I was on, the crew always worked better if you had good food. And I'd eat off some wagons a long time ago. That wasn't the best thing in the world, but you knew better than to complain because the cook could get even if he got a chance back then. But we've been really blessed, really fortunate to get to live really a dream and a passion that I had a long time ago, and that was to still carry on a tradition that them old cooks did going down the trail so many years ago. And it's the greatest thing in the world. That's really it is, because I have the best view out my kitchen window every day.
Now, obviously, I know, Kent, over the years, you've done so many interviews and talked to so many different viewers and listeners of different backgrounds, whether they be urban or rural. And I guess, as you mentioned, you've been on both sides of the fire, cowboying, cooking. I guess talk a little more about that. Just growing up in the West, being around cattle. Let's just talk about your family's involvement and, again, how you worked your way around to the other side of the campfire there.
Right. We were raised down there on the banks of the Red River in the southwest corner of Oklahoma, and we I was very fortunate to grow up with some of the greatest old timers in the world. Back before you knew what a nylon rope was or a poly rope, they was all grass ropes back then, and the old horses that they rode, you could tie on to, and you could rope an elephant if you wanted to. Them to me, them guys were bulletproof. They stood as tall as a giant oak tree, but they taught you more than just cowboy. They taught you values. You were a steward of the land. You took care of land and cattle and horses and everybody in it. And I really wish that I would have had a tape recorder when I was 9, 10, 11 years old and just put it in my pocket and let it run all the time, because I forgot a lot of what them old men told me. But always remember that you work hard every day. Nobody needs to give you something. You just need to work for it, and when you acquire it, then you appreciate it more. And they always told me that every time they'd put you on an old bronc and you'd get bucked off, they said, you just ain't appreciating living enough, or you could have stayed in there, But to them, that was entertainment. To them old timers, they'd put you on something that was pretty rank, and see how long you last, because there wasn't such thing as a round pin. You just snubbed them up a minute, and then you just pitched the slack to you and said you're on your own. But I'm glad things have changed, because the ground wasn't near as hard back then when I was 10 or 11 years old as it was when I was 40. I know.
No joke. So what really sparked your interest in cooking? Was it out of necessity, or did someone really influence you to learn the ways?
Well, my mother was a great cook. We grew up poor, but everybody down here was poor. It was farm and ranch operations everywhere around you. There was people, whether you had a quarter of a land or 80 acres, somebody had a cow on it or a horse on it. And my mother would always make sure that we was fed. She said, we may not have a lot of it, but it's always going to be good and it'll fill you up. And it did. Sort of resonated with me the value of really what cooking was about. She let me in the kitchen when I was 9 or 10 years old and made a chocolate cake. Thought it was the best thing in the world, but I didn't know I was going to have to wash dishes afterwards, or I might have quit. But sometimes it was warmer in Mama's kitchen than what it was out there horseback. Inside living wasn't all that bad at times. I missed going with them sometimes, but I enjoyed every lesson that my mother taught me in cooking, and it was really cook what you love to cook, and cook for the ones you love. And I've watched them. A lot of them old women after church on Sunday would get in a kitchen and never have a recipe and throw something together, and I'd think they don't even know what's in it. But it was always some of the best food I ever eat, and they taught me the value of you. That's where it really, I guess, it started. You can't get full on fancy. You put it out there, and there's a lot of beans and taters and a little bit of fried meat, and you was in pretty good shape.
Now, obviously, I just your Instagram, I follow you there, and on YouTube, and I just enjoy just what you can cook with not having a full-on kitchen.
Yeah.
In today's world, everybody, all the rodeo trailers have kitchens, and all the campers have kitchens on the outside, but you really do, and I don't want to say take a step back in time, but you're preserving just the generations that cooked out on the prairie, or cooked out for all these cowboys, or even the military way back in the day on campaign. I guess where did you learn to really cook outside? I know you said that kitchen was hot where your mama cooked, but what really sparked that interest in learning how to barbecue, how to Dutch oven cook? Who maybe taught you that?
In 1982, I went to the Gila wilderness. My uncle, my mother's brother, was out there, and he'd been in that country for 55, 60 years, knew it better than anybody else did. And he said, hey, I need you to come out here and help me guide some hunters. But he said, I know you can cook because I know your mother taught you how. I'd never cooked in a Dutch oven in my life at that time. And when we got 21 miles into camp there on a bunch of old knot-headed mules, he throwed out a bunch of Dutch ovens and stuff there and said, there you go. We'll have some hunters tomorrow, and you're the cook. Trial and error was always the best teacher I ever had. Altitude made a big difference out there when I got to where I was cooking bread, and I'd go back out there and bread wouldn't rise because you're at 8,500 foot instead of 1,800 foot. And it took me a long time to figure out what you had to do to make it that way, to make it rise, which was add a little baking soda to baking powder, But I did that 5 seasons and learned to cook in a lot of different elements, in the spring and in the fall. And it was it was great country. The Gila was probably the oldest wilderness. It was one of the first ones that Roosevelt had put in that country, and it was still pretty rough. You go in sometime September, come out in December, and it was. My mother would ask me. She said, "Don't you miss home? Don't you miss me?" And I said, "Well, Mama, I really missed a stand-up shower and a sit-down toilet more than anything in the world. When you've been out there that long." But it I won't say it was easy, but it come with a lot of life lessons too. There's times in life you always want to give up on something, or you think, hey, that you just can't do that. It ain't going to work, or it's raining out there, it's snowing out there, or the wind's blowing. You can't cook in that. Well, I always figured whether it was hunters or whether it was cowboys, if they could hunt in it or they could cowboy in it, I could cook in it. And so it didn't matter what come along. You just sort of figured it out. One hunter told me one time, one of the first batches of bread I made at 8,000 foot, he said, "Is that flatbread?" I said, "It is today, brother, but maybe it'll be a little taller tomorrow." So it was, an old man on a ranch told me many years ago, anybody can fry meat and boil coffee. But if you can bake biscuits and pies and all kinds of desserts in a Dutch oven, he said, then I'll call you a cook. And that always stuck pretty hard to me because we we always wanted to feed cowboys better than everybody else did, and that was a goal of ours. And people would tell me, they say, "Hey, this is the only cow camp I've ever been on in my life where you took a wagon out and you gained weight." And I said, "Well, that's what it's about."
Well, you mentioned your wagon. I think up here in my neck of the woods, you'll see a chuck wagon once in a while, but most of the time they're just serving out of it. They they,
Yeah,
they didn't cook out of it. It's for the nostalgia. And I think for so many of us young guys that maybe the first time we even saw a chuck wagon was maybe in Lonesome Dove, and you had Po Campo
yeah.
cooking grasshoppers for the crew there. But talk us through your setup. What is that like when you pull into a camp or a pasture or wherever you're going to be cooking? What does that entail? What are all your supplies, and what was the work like just figuring out how to know what to take and what you need that are essentials, and what have you maybe thrown out of the wagon over the
Yeah.
years that you don't need?
When one of the first ranches that I worked on as a cook was down in South Abilene, Texas, and they furnished a wagon, but I'd make a grocery list and a menu. We were going to be there 3 weeks. We'd move camp every day after lunch. You'd go 8, 9, 10 miles with a wagon and a really sorry team of mules. That would then you'd start over. But always added 2 or 3 days to a menu because Mother Nature's really always in charge. You never know what she's going to bring with it, whether you get blowed away, hailed on, snowed in. Um, and I'd always send a grocery list if it was over 10 days to the ranch where they could have everything I needed at headquarters. And somebody to restock the wagon every 3 to 4 days. The longest we've been out on a ranch was a Bell Ranch, and it was about a little over 6 weeks. And we made a menu there, stuck to it because you really can't change a lot of things when you have a pattern. Sure, there's days that, hey, maybe they got rained out and we're going to trade from, instead of having chicken fried steak tonight, it's a cold old damp rain. We're going to have a bowl of chili, or something like stew. But I always fed cowboys what I wanted to eat. When I'd start with this deal, it was you'd have steak the first night in because you always was pretty traditional in our country. You always set the wagon up on a Sunday afternoon. Cowboys would come in and help you set up camp, and then they'd start works Monday morning, but you fed them supper for helping you set up. So first night was always steak night. We'd either have a ribeye or a New York strip. There'd be a pork chop night. There'd be a catfish night. And I can remember one of the first times on the ranch too that I pulled out some big old 18-ounce bone-in center-cut pork chops, and these two old men were standing out there at the edge of the fly. And he said, "Did you see what that kid broke out there? That's pork. He don't know this cow outfit." And they didn't mind it for breakfast, but they didn't want to see it for supper. They thought it had to be beef 24/7. But they eat two of them apiece. They said it's probably the best pork chop they ever had. They said, but if you break out a chicken, we're going to string you up in that cedar tree tomorrow. So uh, I learned a lot from a lot of old men around camps. I'd visit with them when I'd get the chance. What'd you eat? 50 years ago, what was it like? And it was a lot of biscuits and beans, a little bit of meat, but a lot of coffee too. So if you can feed them like they're used to getting at a great place to eat, that is mine and Shannon's goal. And because they're always going to work harder, they're going to respect you more, and it's really they become family to us. So we take care of them.
You mentioned coffee. That's an art itself when you're boiling a pot of coffee there in camp. What again, trial and error there, but when you're at home, how do you make your coffee? Is it still camp style,
Oh,
or do you have a
we
pot,
do
or
it.
do you
We
percolate?
do it. We do it every different way in the world. I remember one time somebody give us one of them Keurigs. Well, we re-gifted that the next Christmas. We you just send it on down the road. But I've boiled coffee in a tin can. For when we be out fishing, be out hunting or something. Just me by myself. And but boiled coffee to me is really probably the best if you do it right. It's really smooth. You can make a big pot of that. You can let it cool, put it in the ice box, pour your cup the next morning, slap it in the microwave, and you're in pretty good shape. But it was the lifeblood of cowboys. Every ranch I was on, especially there was many old timers when I started. That was when I was in my late 30s, early 40s. They would be 75, 80 years old. And they were they learned the old ways. When you set a cow camp up and you got the wagon fly stretched off there, they didn't come under there unless they asked permission, and you'd let them under there. I've seen them stand out in a driving rain and eat out from under the fly, because they said, "Hey, this is a habit. We're not going to break it." And it's good to be able to pass some of that knowledge on. And when we'd go back to ranches, they'd say, "Hey, run this like they used to, Kent," and because really a cook was a notoriously known for being an old grumpy guy that was just mean as hell, and he didn't really like people. But we've never been that way. Sure, I want to get people to know what the old ways were like, but we have so much more to work with than old Cookie did back in the times. But I've been in camps to where there was a cook back in the 1880s, 1890s in the very same place, so it's pretty good history.
So when you're looking at maybe how your menu has changed or what ingredients you're bringing along, you think, like as you mentioned, meat, beans, and coffee, but
Yeah.
how has that maybe changed, and maybe how have you introduced some of these cowboys to some foods they maybe not never thought they'd try before?
We've always tried to make the classics on a ranch, but then there's a lot of desserts. We'll make a fresh dessert twice a day. You make fresh bread twice a day. Whether that be a sourdough biscuit, a buttermilk biscuit, a baking powder biscuit, cornbread. But you look out because we're liable to throw like a raspberry chipotle enchilada in there, something like that. We fried a lot of rattlesnake in some of them camps. So it's one of them deals to where you never really know what's coming. A lot of them have never had bread pudding with a whiskey cream sauce. Typically on a ranch, you'd have, if you had a dessert, it was a cobbler, another cobbler and then another cobbler. And I've made so many cobblers in my life that I don't even like to see them unless somebody else made them and they got ice cream covering them up. But, Shan is a great baker too when she came along, and she's made a lot of different cakes, and she will spoil them guys pretty quick to a great dessert. But it's really anything that you think you might could find in a restaurant. If we can spell it, we'll try to cook it.
I was going to ask about rattlesnakes. I guess what's the best way to cook a rattlesnake?
Well, take a really big snake to have any meat on him, because all you're getting is just that little strip of loin right off the back, and then the rest of it is just ribs. And but if you can get a really big snake, I mean, they're all right deep fried, but they make great chili meat. If you can pull that stuff out of there and chop it up pretty good, brown it just a little, and then just go to like you would make any other traditional chili. Get you some good dried chilies to mix with it, and it's pretty good eating. But we have fried a lot of them.
And I mentioned at the beginning here, Kent. Obviously, you were able to participate and compete in that barbecue showdown on Netflix. I think it was a little unfair advantage of you having to go up against someone that lives in Florida and has to cook fish in that runoff there. If say it would have been Rocky Mountain oysters, that
Yeah.
the you might have tipped the scales there a little bit there, but for yourself being able to get out in front of, again, not just people that enjoy the Western lifestyle, but get in front of audiences across the nation and the world. How important is that, not just for the Western way of life, but also for us ranchers back at home that are raising high quality, real nutrient beef, protein called beef?
Yeah. I've always, and we've done a lot of cooking competitions over the years, and I've always been the same person every day. I had a producer tell me, I had a producer tell me one time, she said, you never change when the camera's in front of you. And I said, ma'am, I ain't changed socks in a week. I ain't going to change nothing else. But they get to realize that there's a lot of people out there that are still making a living just like it started in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, and plumb on. Sure, we've got something better to work with than they had. Maybe our times aren't as hard and the days ain't quite as long as some of them were back then, but it's still the same values, same methods that we instill in it. We're always thankful to God for every chance that we get, but we try to relay that on to the audience too, no matter where it's at, whether we're cooking for a TV show or we're cooking on a ranch.
And Kent, I think here in the United States we have an abundant food supply. We have not. Fortunately, we have not had to be hungry in several decades and generations now at this point. But how important is it for consumers to really value food, the people that raise it, but also the importance of just having a safe food supply and knowing how to cook it?
You know, we did some stuff for National Cattlemen's. They sent us to New York City a long time ago for Stu Leonard's grocery stores. And I remember when they called me, old Scott told me, he said, "Hey, Ken, I need you to go to somewhere in Connecticut." And I said, "Is that right south of Fort Worth?" And he said, "No, no, 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 you're not paying attention here." And I said, "That's a long way to drag a wagon, my friend." And it's like 2,900 miles. But I never get, how do I want to say this? I'm always amazed at the people that really don't know maybe where great beef comes from. There's still folks out there that think he might have walked up to that case and fell in a cellophane wrapper and he's just sitting there. But when you can raise high quality beef with the good grass, good water, good hay, good grain, you get some of the best tasting meat there ever is going to be. And these people would ask me, they'd say, "Hey, I can only eat grass fed beef." And I love to have fun with people. And I'll say, "Well, do you know before that it was milk fed?" "Oh, then I can't eat it at all. I'm lactose intolerant." And I say, "There you go. See, you done messed up right there." I said, "Ma'am, it was all grass fed at one time." And I said, "There's so many different producers out there, ma'am, that are raising high quality beef that know how to put the right amount of feed to something to give you the right amount of marbling, the right amount of back fat." And I said, when you see it in a grocery store, you need to think about these folks. What have they had to go through to put this on your plate? And if we can give you a little knowledge to cook it and you can really look back and think about, hey, this is the way this is raised, I think people take a little more pride in just, hey, this is a great meal. But, there's somebody that put a lot into this before it got here.
What are some tips you have for whether they're cattle producers or just someone that's tuning in today just to listen? I guess when it comes to what's the best way to cook beef? We cook beef almost every day in our family. That's what's in our chest. It comes from our operation. We can always be better cooks. We can always learn. I guess what from your experience out there, what are some tips you have, whether it's at a cow camp or maybe on the grill out on the patio after working cows? What are some tips you have for folks?
When we talk about eating beef, and you can have it for breakfast, dinner, and supper. There's no bad time ever to have a cut of beef. Throughout the United States and traveling, doing YouTube and everything else, always hear people say, I just can't get that steak right on the grill. It didn't turn out like I wanted it. Well, so many times to me, people do two things wrong every time, and that is they underseason and they overcook. I always tell people he done died once. Let's don't kill him again. Let's eat that beef the way it's supposed to be. And for years, I never had a thermometer, never had no one of them meat probes, nothing. It's just by the way when you touch a steak, you knew what it was. And really, it's pretty simple to do. You just learn it through the years, and it's when I was raised, my mother, we didn't have a grill, and if she pan fried any meat, it was pan fried to death. Back in the 50s and 60s, because they wasn't about to eat a rare piece of beef. That they thought that was probably unhealthy. But to me, if you cook a steak past medium rare, hey, we need to back up and think about it. Because first of all, you're conserving the moisture that's in that meat when it's raised right by not overcooking it, but also the taste that you're going to get is so much better. And we've converted a lot of people that used to be well done to medium, so we're doing pretty good on that. But if I can get them down to medium rare, I'll be batting 100.
What's your favorite way to prepare? I guess let me rephrase that. What's your favorite cut of beef to cook, and what's your favorite way to cook it?
I mean, I've eat everything from the tongue to the tail, and like it all. But I do love a good fillet. We'll always usually get, an 8-ounce fillet that is prime most of the times, and always going to season them about 4 hours ahead of time. And we put a little lime juice on meat. It's not that we're making a margarita. Lime juice is a natural tenderizer. The acidic acid in there breaks down muscle consistency, and so it's going to make it more tender. But we season it there too. Then we'll always bring it out about 45 minutes before time to cook it to let it come to room temp, unless you're cooking outside and it's 105. But this way you're going to get a more even cook time, and I've done them so many different ways, from searing them in a hot skillet to reverse searing them on a grill, to where you let them get a little smoke, you let them get to a temperature of about 110, and then you just slap them over there on a flaming hot fire and get to about 125 and let them rest a minute till they get to wherever you want them after that. And to me, when you can prepare a steak right, especially for people that maybe don't eat a lot of steak. We used to do a lot of workshops to where it would be a steak cooking deal, and there'd be people in there that didn't eat much steak at all. But to see the look on their face when they cut that first bite, because it cuts like butter, and it is the best tasting thing ever. So people get that all factor in a way by seeing what they just created themselves, and it's not hard to do. If it was rocket science work, I'd have had to quit a long time ago. Make sure you got good hardwood. If you see somebody using lighter fluid on a grill, don't stop. Go eat pizza. It's one of the worst things ever. But for years we burnt mesquite. That's all we had down here. But we've learned to pair woods with a lot of different meats going through. I love to still cook a good steak over mesquite and maybe a little oak mix. But if we're cooking something in a smoker for a long period of time, say it's a brisket or inside of the round or something like that, we're going to mix a little fruit wood with it. Most of the time it's a cherry to give you some good bark and color there. But don't be afraid to experiment. Just make sure it's a good hardwood.
Now, you mentioned lime. When you're preparing that, I guess, how much lime are you using when doing that? Because I was kind of, I understand what lime does, but you just sparked my memory of that, and I'll share my story afterwards. But when you're using lime, how much are you using? Obviously, are you using fresh lime, or are you using it from the bottle? For our audience and for myself, I want to know more about that.
It's not much. We did a deal forever for about 14 years where we fed about 525 steaks to people, and you mash a lot of limes that way. But it's very little. If you start with good quality beef, you don't have much you have to do to it. You're not going to ever taste the lime juice in it, and I always put lime on anything, beef, pork, wild game, anything with fins and feathers was always lemon juice. But it doesn't take very much. I'd say at the most you might be putting a half a tablespoon on one side and a half a tablespoon on the other, and it'll do the job in about 4 hours.
Well, and it sparked my memory because we were, I was up on a ranch here about a year ago. I was on an exchange trade mission with some Argentine gauchos. So we went down there and they came up here and they
Yeah,
did a pitchfork fondue. And I've never had a good pitchfork fondue.
yeah,
It's always overcooked and just piece of, rubber, but that cook did something with the lime and soaked them right. And it was actually a good pitchfork
good.
fondue. But I was just curious because doing stuff like that, or just you got those tougher cuts of meat that you got
Yeah,
to feed the family because you got to get through get through the
yeah,
freezer. But thinking of those gauchos down in Argentina, they just take their time when they're cooking meat.
yeah.
They start their coals, they get their rack, and they just put it out there in the open air, and you sit back and have a glass of wine or beer or whatever, and you wait for it to cook. And I guess that transitions into my next point is we kind of just get in a hurry nowadays when trying to get meals and get families down the road and whatnot. I guess, what are some advice tips you have for people about just meal prep and coming up with a menu and utilizing what's in your freezer and not going to a fast food restaurant, when you're rushed?
There's I always told folks there's more people at a table now holding a phone than there is a fork. Everybody thinks they're in a hurry, and there is a lot of fast food that's going through the country. But especially down here this time of year when it's hot, we may fire up the grill early some morning and grill enough steak uh, to last the week. Whether you're going to eat a steak that night, but also we have a lot of salad when it's hot like this. So we can cut steak up into so many different forms. Whether you're using it for fajitas, whether you're using it for tacos, whether you're putting it on a baked potato, it's pretty easy to do. But uh, I remember when we'd butcher our own and we'd go get. I mean, Mama would start it off. She'd have it pretty well mixed in that freezer to where she knew exactly where it was, and you knew when you was getting down there to the bottom when there wasn't much left but liver. So but she would always plan these things out of what you could cook with it. And we froze a lot of dishes back then. Mom would stick them in deep freeze. That we'd cooked a lot of casseroles. Um, there's sometimes that we'll fix some casseroles on some ranches to where it's easier for us to rewarm them. Like they're going to be in a hurry the next day. We've got to do this. We've done a lot of stuff where you're breaking camp right after breakfast or before breakfast, and go 14 mile in a wagon, and you'd make like uh, fajitas, but there's in a burrito to where you could wrap them up 10 full, put them in a good Yeti ice chest, throw them in the wagon. Them cowboys could come by there because they wasn't going to get no lunch that day. But people really just need to really slow down unless you're in a competition, and you better hurry is all I can tell you. But fire has always drawn people together. It first started out as warmth, and then there was some fellow that said, "Hey, we can throw something dead on there, and it might be pretty good to eat." But it's it's about bringing family and friends together, and when you can share a good steak with people like that, sitting around in the backyard or sit at an old kitchen table, it's a holiday every day.
Very, very, very true. And I guess when you look at just the presence that you have, the education that you're sharing with so many people, I guess what for you and your wife, I guess, what is the most fulfilling thing when you sit back at the end of the day after working hard and creating some mighty fine meals? What's the most rewarding thing for both of you? Because it is a team effort.
She is the love of my life. Shannon is, and she's a great cook. She's been on them ranches just like me, 6 and 7 weeks. There's no spa days. There's no days off. You'd be lucky to get take a shower once a week. But to us, it's always been able, just like my mother taught me. I love to cook, and I may not eat it after I cook it because sometimes I get tired of looking at it. But she said I love to look at the people's faces when they take the first bite, or some old timer that had been on a wagon 40, 50 years in different ranches across the United States come up to you and say, young fella, you might be the best cook I've ever seen in my life. And that's what it's about. Just take pride in what you do. Share it with somebody. and you're gifted. You'll be blessed because it's really, people try to complicate life at times, but don't complicate it with food. It's pretty easy.
Now, might be a sore question, but have you cooked sea bass since you got home?
No, we ain't cooked no more fish since we got home. I told that girl there, I said, Melissa, I said, you're surrounded by water. I said, Noah didn't even come by down there where I live. We just got a half inch. I said, we don't have much fish. And I said, fresh or seafood to us usually was Mrs. Paul's fish sticks, that come out of a box. But, when things like that happen and you have an hour to cook something,
Oh,
and I'm always going to make a full blown meal, not just part of a meal. But you think afterwards, shoulda, coulda, woulda, might have been there. But there's usually when something pops in my brain, I just go with it
yeah.
because it's sort of like stepping on an old horse that's going to buck. You just don't know when it's going to start.
And then you feel that little hunch in
Yeah.
the shoulders there and that gap between your saddle pad and yep, we know that. But Kent, I know you probably got a busy day and I don't want to take up too much time, but I guess what's just a message you have for cattlemen and women out there that they're probably wrapping up haying just like me. I just finished stacking our, as my neighbors coin them, idiot cubes, but
Yeah.
we got some round bales to still wrap up yet. But I guess what is just some advice or just things you want to share with our cattlemen and women out there here today?
First of all, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, and may God's blessing be upon each and every one of you, because this is not something that if you was to tell them, hey, you're not ever going to make any money no more, do you still want to do this? 99% of them would say, it's the only thing I love to do. It's what I know to do. And like my dad said, you find something you're good at, do it better than anybody else, you'll never have a job. And to most of all the ranchers and everybody that I've known out there in that country that's making a living off land, cattle, and waiting for it to rain is the biggest thing. Weather's always got the biggest factor. Never give up hope. Always have a dream. There's a silver lining somewhere every time, and the cup is always half full. It ain't never half empty.
Very inspiring words, and I can't say anything better myself. So I don't want to take away those encouraging words from anybody here today, Kent. So I just want to thank you for joining us.
Oh no, it was my pleasure, my friend. And a guy asked me one time, said, "You cook a lot of beef, don't you? Aren't you sort of afraid of that at times?" And I said, "Only when it's on the hoof."
Very true. Well, we appreciate all you do on behalf of all the cattle producers out there that work day in and day out to raise real protein called beef,
Yeah.
not that lab growing stuff that they're trying to push on people right now, but the real stuff. And we appreciate everything you do to help keep the Western lifestyle alive and educating consumers along the way. We appreciate you joining us here today.
It has been my pleasure, my friend, and all I can tell them is eat more beef.
Well, thank you so much, Kent.
Uh-huh.
And we look forward to joining you again, maybe down the road. And again, check him out on all those social media channels and learn something, and maybe try it out at your next time you're grilling, cooking out, or maybe you'll roll out that Chuckwagon that's maybe out in the barn or something like that.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool. But Kent, thank you for joining us, and thank you, our friends, for joining us and answering the Cattleman's Call here today. I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to NCBA's Cattleman's Call podcast with Lane Nordlund. For more information, visit ncba.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast today.